Hey everyone, my name is Jenna and I'm a behavior analyst with Northeast Metro 916. For one of the first behavior themed videos in our professional development series that we're releasing, I chose a training that I've put together and I've presented in a few of our member districts previously. It's on behavior management and it gives you just some general tips and strategies for being proactive with students and managing problem behavior. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation so that you guys can follow along. And we will go from there. All right. So this is the behavior management training, how to identify and effectively manage student behavior. As I said at the beginning, I'm a board certified behavior analyst. My previous experience, I worked in a clinical setting doing early intervention ABA therapy with children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And my current focus, I've been with the district for just about 3 years now. And what I do is provide consultative services to staff in our member districts. That might include education assistants, special education teachers, related service providers. Occasionally I'll also meet and talk with parents. So I work with basically anyone in our member district who requests a consultation for specific behavior concerns for students. So we'll just jump right in. Problem behavior happens. It happens on a daily basis with our kids, whether it's mild noncompliance where they just simply won't do anything, or a huge tantrum behavior where there's elopement from the classroom or building, physical aggression, property destruction. There can be a wide range of problem behaviors. And I just want to acknowledge here that it does happen. And those of you who are working with students every day who do have problem behaviors, you probably have the most patience and compassion that people working in education can have, because it does take a lot of time and patience and dedication to work through problem behaviors and to help our students learn new skills. So when problem behavior happens, the very first thought we have, or the very first reaction that we have, is that we just want the behavior to stop. We want it to go away so that we can get the student back on track and continue with their schedule. Instead of reacting, we want to find ways that we can help, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. When we do respond in the moment and we follow that more reactionary approach, it can result in coercion or just reactive responses, whether we're emotionally reacting or we're letting our bias kind of take over the way that we're responding to behavior. And what I want to point out here is that if we can understand what's causing the behavior, our response will be much more effective because it'll be focused on the purpose of the behavior rather than how it's impacting us in our own personal reaction. The first thing we want to do is avoid coercion. I know that coercion, it's intended to help, but it can have negative effects. It can result from our own feelings of frustration, and it can lead to feelings of guilt, shame, and a sense of being forced within our students. So different examples of this include force, threats, criticism, despair, logic, taking away items and privileges, and that's very different from planned consequences. If we're just arbitrarily taking things away from students, that does feel really coercive, and there's not a pattern established there. There's no predictability, so they don't really know whether behavior is going to result in a loss of privilege or not. Whereas when it's a planned consequence, the student is informed and then they're able to make the choice. Hey, if you do this, then you can earn this cool thing. If you make this other choice and you're not following what's expected, then this is what's going to happen. And so that would be more of a planned consequence. And then also telling on them to others is another example. So the effects of coercion, students will age you. That's the acronym we'll use here. They might avoid, try to get even, or escape you. And that's not something that we want with our students. We want them to, want to be around adults and have that relationship. And so when coercion produces short-term compliance, it can have some long-term losses and really damage that relationship that we work so hard to build with our students. That said, understanding the basics of behavior and behavior management can help produce that long-term improvement that we want in our students. So really quick, I do want to go over some basics of behavior. Some of you have probably already heard this, but I like to go over it just so that everyone's on the same page. There are 3 events that happen in a sequence of a behavior and whether or not it's going to happen again. The first one is the antecedent, and that's what comes before the behavior. It might trigger the behavior or it might prompt the behavior. The next section is the behavior that occurs. And then the third part is the consequence. And here, when I talk about consequence, I'm not talking about something punitive or something negative following the behavior. I'm simply talking about what happens after the behavior occurs. So the antecedent is what happens before, the consequence is what happens after the behavior. So here are some examples. When you see a stop sign while you're driving, you stop your car and you don't get in an accident. So that's an example of kind of how the antecedent, behavior, and consequence work together. Another example, I have a headache, so I rub my temples. The headache decreases. It makes me feel a little bit better. The third example, my birthday is coming up. I ask for a new sweater. I get a sweater for my birthday. And then the last one, I see a coworker walking down the hall, so I smile and say hello. My coworker smiles and returns the greeting. So now that we're able to identify the antecedents, behaviors, and consequences in a series of events, I want to talk about function. So there are 4 functions of behavior, and these 2 pictures kind of show what those are. A good acronym to remember is everybody eats. And EATS stands for escape, attention, tangible, and sensory. So keep in mind, escape can be from social interactions or from non-preferred tasks. To gain attention, it can be from peers, adults, it can be positive or negative. Basically anything that gets a response would be attention. Tangible could be a preferred item or it could be a preferred activity. And then sensory, that's what we in the behavior world call automatic reinforcement. It's something that they can give to themselves that they don't need anybody else to give to them. So like when your arm itches and you scratch it, the itch goes away. That would be an example of automatic reinforcement that we experience every day. So putting it all together, back to those antecedent behavior consequence scenarios that I talked about before. The very first one, when you see the stop sign, stop your car, and you don't get in an accident, you're escaping or avoiding getting in that accident. When you have a headache and you rub your temples, the headache decreases. That's automatic reinforcement or that sensory piece. When your birthday is coming up, you ask for a sweater and you get one for your birthday. That is an example of a tangible. And then seeing a coworker walking down the hall, smiling and saying hello, and then the coworker returning the greeting, that's attention. So those are some everyday examples of how our own behavior can serve these functions. So really quick, I'll give you guys a few seconds, but we're gonna practice. So here's an example. You tell Sam to sit at his desk and give him a math worksheet. Sam sits on the floor, crosses his arms, and yells no. You set a timer for 5 minutes and tell Sam he needs to sit at his desk once the timer goes off. So from this example, I want you to take a few minutes and think to yourself, what is the antecedent? What is the behavior? What's the consequence? And then based on that information, what is the function that this behavior is serving in this moment? All right, so let's go over it. In this example, the antecedent was that Sam was told to sit at his desk and he was given a math worksheet. The behavior is Sam sits on the floor, crosses his arms, and yells no. The consequence is that the staff set the timer and told Sam that he needs to sit at his desk once the timer goes off. So in this scenario, the function of his behavior is to escape or avoid sitting at his desk and doing math. And the funny thing about this example is that his behavior worked. He effectively got 5 more minutes of peace and quiet, nobody asking him to do anything, by sitting on the floor and saying no, that he did not want to do the math worksheet. We're going to talk about how we can flip this around and use timers to transition prior to giving the instruction so that we avoid inadvertently reinforcing escape avoidance behavior. Really quick, just some other factors that might impact behavior that it's important to know about. The environment, whether it's loud, if there's a lot of peers present, if people are in a student's physical space, those are all things that can impact behavior. Past experiences, so there are things that we might not see as triggers to behavior that might set off a behavior based on a student's past experience. Medications have a huge impact on behavior in a couple of ways. One is whether or not they're taking it regularly. Sometimes kiddos miss medication. Another component is the side effects that might occur when a child is taking medication. Physiology or internal stimuli, so that would include hunger, thirst, lack of sleep, pain, illness, possibly residual feelings from a previous event. Those are all things that might impact behavior. And then the last one is skill deficits. A lot of the students that we're working with, part of the reason why they're with us or they're receiving special education services is because they do have a skill deficit and they need more support. And when behavior happens, that can show us that there might be a skill deficit that the student has, and we need to work with them to build up some skills so that they can appropriately communicate what they need or how they're feeling. So data can come to our rescue when we notice there is a problem behavior. I want to go over how we use data. So we collect data so that we can see a pattern in the behavior. Is there a correlation between the behavior and an antecedent? Is there a correlation to behavior and time of day? What's the information that we need in order to make some decisions about the behavior? Based on the pattern, we can also identify the function. Once we know the function of the behavior, we can make a plan. We can identify replacement behaviors, we can identify some proactive strategies for the student, and we can also make a plan for how to respond to the problem behavior. Then after we have a plan, we continue to collect data to see, is the plan actually working? Is the behavior getting better? Is the student learning the new skills that we're trying to teach them? And based on that data, you can say, yep, the plan's great, let's keep going, or no, maybe we should make some modifications. So when it comes to data collection, a lot of it comes down to forming new habits. Data collection is a new process to a lot of us. And so it does take some practice and self-discipline, remembering that we need to collect it, that it is a priority. Some ways that we collect data might be based on time or might be based on the number of times the behavior happens, like the frequency. Ways to increase data collection accuracy can be to set a timer for yourself. I know when I'm creating data collection forms, I try to align it with the student's schedule as best as I can. So that way during natural transitions, the education staff who's collecting the data can take a quick second and write down what happened or score the behavior based on the rubric that's been created. Data collection times can occur on the hour, half hour, or during natural transitions like I talked about. And the other piece is to make it quick and easy. So you can use tallies, clickers. Sometimes I just use yes, no data. So there are a lot of ways that we can make it more efficient too, as staff who are working directly with students can provide that support while also collecting the data that we need to make decisions. How do we change behavior? We can change it in a couple different ways. Antecedents, modifying things before the behavior happens, through programming, which would be teaching and practicing new skills, and then through consequences, and that might be through reinforcement or extinction, and also consistent responses to occurrences of problem behavior. Most of the time, our students have behavior intervention plans, and that's where we use a combination of all three of those components. Some antecedent strategies could be environment modifications, increasing the use of visuals, so having a schedule, a first then, using timers, maybe making some schedule changes, switching some things around, task presentation and order, so switching around when you present certain things, timing and duration, so how long a student is working on a task, and then also making sure that there are scheduled breaks or maybe even walks for the student to incorporate some movement. The note that I want to point out is that antecedent strategies do not address the problem behavior at its source. They simply provide additional support while we're teaching replacement behaviors. So they help prevent the occurrence of problem behavior, but it doesn't make the behavior go away. That behavior will still be there. The only way that behavior will go away is if we teach a behavior that can take its place. That's where programming strategies come in. So with skill deficits, we might teach the skills that the student needs in order to be successful, like sitting in a group or appropriate bids for peer attention, things like that. We can also teach replacement behaviors. So based on the function of the problem behavior, we can identify an appropriate alternative that serves the same function. There should be a structured plan for teaching, prompting, and reinforcing that behavior, and staff need to be consistent in implementing those strategies. It can be a long process, so be patient and stay positive. Behavior change does not happen overnight, and sometimes it feels like you take a few steps back before you see some progress, and we'll talk about why that happens too. Really quick, I have a couple visuals about identifying functions and replacement behaviors. So in this kind of graph here or table, it talks about the antecedents, which trigger the problem behavior, which have that maintaining consequence or function. From here, when the antecedent happens, we want the student to engage in the replacement behavior, and then the maintaining consequence will happen. Now, a lot of times that seems counterintuitive because if their behavior functions for escape and they're asking for breaks all day long, how are they going to actually learn anything? Well, at the same time we're working on this replacement behavior, we can also work on a desired behavior or an underdeveloped skill that leads to our desired consequence and reinforcement for the student. The second visual is the same pattern or sequence, but just with an example applied. And we will talk about consequence strategies. So consequence strategies include positive reinforcement, which is adding something the student likes. For example, a student asks for a snack, the teacher gives the student crackers, the student's going to be more likely to ask for a snack again. There's also negative reinforcement. That's removing something that the student dislikes. So here the student might ask for music to be turned down. So the teacher turns the music down. The student is going to be more likely to ask for the music to be turned down in the future. The takeaway from all of this is that reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, always increases the likelihood that that behavior is going to happen again. Few essentials of reinforcement. It needs to be delivered immediately. That immediacy piece is huge, especially when we're trying to help students make a connection between a positive or desired behavior and the reinforcement. So here we want to make sure that we're giving reinforcement as soon as possible after the desired behavior occurs. The size is also important. The level of effort that the student puts forth in order to earn the reinforcement should be matched with the size or the quality of that reinforcer. There should also be a contingency, so it's only given after the behavior occurs. Individualization, the students will like different things, and so it's important to make sure that you have things available that the student likes and would want to work towards earning. And then the last one is a schedule. So it should be given on a regular basis based on whatever the schedule is that you come up with. When to use reinforcement, we want to make sure that we provide reinforcement options before giving the task instruction. Ask the students what they want to work for. Give them the options that they can earn for that day. Once they pick one, then you can say, okay, first let's do this work, then we'll get that reward you picked out. So task completion results in reinforcement. So what happens when reinforcement is offered after a problem behavior has occurred? What the student learns in that instance is that they get the instruction, they engage in problem behavior, then we pull out the rewards and we start trying to entice them with that. So what they're learning is the connection between problem behavior, then we talk about what we're going to earn. What we want to do is talk about what the student will earn first, and then set the expectation for what work needs to be completed in order for that reward to be earned. And that's kind of what it says at the bottom. The likelihood of problem behavior is minimized when the reinforcer choice is presented before any mention of the difficult or non-preferred activity. So the other consequence strategy is extinction. Extinction happens when we withhold the reinforcement that was previously given following the problem behavior. So what students have learned is these behaviors work. They result in what they're trying to get, whether it's escape avoidance, whether it's gaining attention, whether it's access to something that they like. These behaviors have worked for them. And when they stop working, behaviors typically get worse before they get better. So it's likely to increase in frequency, duration, or intensity at first. So it might feel like you're making the problem behavior worse. And with extinction, it needs to be used along with reinforcement and programming so that the students have an alternative rather than just riding out the extinction burst. So a little bit more about extinction. You need to plan for an extinction burst when you're talking about a problem behavior and you're going to say, no, this behavior is escape avoidance. So when we give an instruction, we're going to follow through and we're going to wait the student out. Keep in mind that you should have an identified replacement behavior and develop some teaching or programming strategies to teach and practice that behavior with the student, and make sure that the reinforcement is there to reward the desired behavior. We would not want to use extinction if there are safety risks involved with the behavior, or if there's no plan for a replacement behavior, because then the student has no other way of getting what they're trying to get with the problem behavior. The last piece I do want to include here is that if you know you might need to give in right away. And what this is going to help with is that down the road, when you decide to or when you're able to follow through, maybe with the task in the example that I talked about first, the student won't wait you out as long as if you waited them out 15 minutes and then gave in. So again, if you're going to give in right away. I do have some proactive strategies that I can share with you. The first one is about building rapport. So spend time getting to know the students. I know that we're really, really busy on a daily basis, but it is important to spend time with students and talk about what they like. Figure out what are things that they enjoy talking about, what are they interested in learning about, what are some of their favorite activities. This can also happen through check-ins. And then when students are upset, listening, giving empathy statements. And then I do have a video on pre-session pairing that I will provide in some additional resources for you guys to look at later on. Another proactive strategy is praise. We want to catch the students being good and acknowledge any and all positive behavior that we see them display throughout the day. There are different ways to use praise. One is individual, so you can do an individual call out with a student or quiet praise. And then there's also group praise. And then my favorite is pivot praise, which is praising students who are showing the desired behavior and then pivoting back once that student who is off task is also showing the desired behavior. You can also pair praise with tangible rewards if praise alone is not effective. So a lot of our students haven't experienced praise as an effective reinforcer, so we might pair it with a token, or we might pair it with access to a preferred activity so that they're learning that connection that praise means good things happen too. Another proactive strategy is offering choice. So allowing students opportunity to make choices related to tasks that they're going to work on and reinforcement that they might want to earn throughout the day. You can vary the task and reinforcement choices regularly. Maybe you have a rotating schedule of what's available on each day. What that's going to do is prevent satiation. So if the student is only working for goldfish all day, every day, eventually they're going to get sick of earning goldfish. And so you'll want to make sure that you have a variety of things that you can offer them so that they don't get sick of the reward and then are no longer motivated to do the work that you're asking them to do. Another proactive strategy is the way that we give instructions. So when we are giving instructions to students, we want to keep it very simple, make it clear and direct. Give one instruction at a time, and then you can build off of that. So once they've completed the first part, then you would jump into the next instruction. Say what you mean and mean what you say. And here, what I want you to keep in mind is just that follow through piece. If they're expected to do something, make sure that you tell them what it is that they need to do. Use a statement and not a question. So instead of saying, "Can you get started on your math?" you would say, "It's time to get started on your math." And then using visuals as needed. So maybe holding up fingers, writing it out, or using other visuals to show what the expectation is with regard to the instruction that you're giving. Another proactive strategy is task assistance. So when a student routinely struggles with a task or activity, you would want to offer assistance before the onset of problem behavior. Another strategy with task assistance is having the student work on something that they've mastered, something that they're good at, before presenting a more difficult task. And then you can also modify the task by breaking the activity down into smaller parts or decreasing the duration, the amount of time that they have to engage in that activity to work on increasing their tolerance of that task. Another proactive strategy with regard to language is focusing on what the student can do rather than what they can't. So the example here, the student asks for an iPad, but another student is using it. The teacher says, "A friend is using the iPad right now. You can play with cars or listen to audiobooks instead." So making sure that you acknowledge the request, but instead of simply saying, "No, it's not available, go find something else," offer them some specific alternatives so that they can choose something and then focus on that instead of perseverating on, "Nope, you can't have the iPad." Focus more on, "Well, these are your choices that you have," and then offering those. Reactive strategies. So another piece with the language, when you're prompting or redirecting a problem behavior, you're going to want to focus on the behavior that you want to see. So an example, the student is running. The teacher says walking feet instead of no running. What this does is it prevents us from providing attention to the undesired behavior. And it also provides us with a teaching opportunity to prompt a desired behavior and then also to reinforce that behavior. So when we say walking feet and the student who's running stops and starts walking, then we can also praise them for showing walking feet in the hallway. You might also want to redirect to the task at hand, keep things very concrete and direct for the students. Remind the student of what he or she is earning, so that chosen reinforcer that we talked about beforehand. You could also incorporate a visual first then board or put it on their schedule so that they know when they're going to earn that reward. When you are addressing a problem behavior, remember to remain neutral and matter of fact in tone and have a relaxed body posture. Even if we're not saying out loud that we're getting frustrated, students can see that tension and they can kind of take that and run with it sometimes too. So make sure that you stay very neutral, matter of fact in your tone, and have that relaxed body posture. So response strategies, back to the ABCs. When you are noticing a problem behavior is happening, really, really quick, think about what was that antecedent and what is the behavior the student is doing right now. Based on that information, what is the student trying to get from the behavior? That will help you understand how to better respond to the problem behavior. Some common antecedents that we come across on a daily basis are denial or delay of a preferred activity, giving instructions or task demands, lack of structure, and there are many times during the day when that can happen, transitions, presence or proximity of others, change in routine or expectation, lack of engagement or reduced attention, or some consequent induced behaviors. So if their actions are redirected, corrected, or punished, if something is withheld due to engagement in another behavior, not earning a reinforcing activity, or needing to take a break, loss of points, and then calling support staff. So those are some examples of consequence-induced antecedents. So when we're responding to behavior, we want to respond based on the function. So if it's escape avoidance, we're going to want to follow through. Attention, planned ignoring the behavior and not the student. Access to a tangible or activity, you're going to block access to that activity and redirect to what the student needs to do first. And then if it's automatic or sensory based in the function, you would simply block and redirect. So the biggest piece to remember here is that consistency is key. So when you are making a plan to address a problem behavior, make sure that all the staff working with the student are using common language. And then everyone takes the same approach. So you might want to try one or two things at a time and then give it some time to work. Collect that data, look back on it and see, is this making a difference, or do we need to go back and revise our approach? Consistency leads to predictability for the students. It helps enforce expectations and it increases trust. And then how do we track consistency? That's through data collection. It needs to be consistent to show that what we are doing is working. Feel free to reach out with any questions. I do have some additional resources attached, and so you should be able to access those. But you are welcome to reach out with any questions that you might have during this time. Thank you very much.